The mental health issue is associated to policing, whether in America or here in Indiana, is relatively simple. Law enforcement uses the local jails for a mental health facility. You see the complexities associated with the perception of someone being in mental distress are different with so many different depending upon who you ask, right? Whether it be a judge, a prosecutor, a police officer, a person walking down the street, a family member, a friend, whoever it might be, hugely successful, hugely successful. I think we get so hung up on the magnitude of success as it equates to a metric that we lose sight of what it really does in real time. And the analogy that I've always used, and I'll continue to use today, is that the governor allowed me to spend almost $7 million on a helicopter. We now have 3 of them. And within a matter of weeks, we've located a little boy wandering aimlessly in the woods on a cold, dark, rainy, dreary night, all by himself. Was that $7 million worth it? Absolutely. I think anybody would say yes with that one save. Many since then, right? Sometimes we lose sight of the totality of the victim experience. The only people that think that's a good idea are those who don't understand the magnitude of what those runs are. It's our job and my job to worry about what happens in the middle of the night or during the daytime. Because 99% of people are good, but there's a very small percentage that aren't. If you haven't experienced interaction with those people, you don't understand. It's just that simple. You don't understand. And many people that are trying to make sense of the environment in which we're living understand that. Very real. The way that individual is acting, they believe it. He or she believes they're right. Right? That's scary. That's scary. And at 2 a.m, and someone appears in their door of their home or the doorway to their bedroom or their doorway to wherever they happen to be inside that home is a very dangerous moment in time because they don't think anything's wrong. So taking law enforcement out of this will be fine until one of those volunteers who's trying to do the right thing. These are very volatile situations. And we'll have to see over time how they work. You got to give everybody credit for at least trying. It's not fair for us to ask us if it's fair. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is it overwhelming? Is it maybe unreasonable? Yes. But who else? If not us, then who? You're right. With all of the imbalances that we see in our human existence today, gosh, where do you start? Where do you start? And I go back to the cliche statement, people care way more about how much you care than how much you know. And I really wish people that sat in positions of influence would say that. Because they feel like they have to have a solution, and I think it's all head fake. I don't think there's any amount of money that we as a government can throw at these many issues associated with human existence, with violence, with hate, discord, and imbalance. I mean, those are the things that keep me awake. I just don't understand. Somebody's got to be at fault. Somebody's got to be to blame. And then we're going to throw money at this, or we're going to throw more laws at this, and I just don't see any value in any of it. See, and I think that's a bad rap that we've gotten, frankly, Vic, over time. Putting somebody in jail and arresting them is a last resort for us. You know, I go back to the Norman Rockwell paintings. Again, I'm looking at the ability that the police officer had to influence the outcome of the situation. Oh, we absolutely are. Untrained. We absolutely are. Oh, we absolutely are. Untrained. We absolutely are. Right? So you're right. It's without training, we're expected to be all things to all people. And sometimes that's really difficult, but we'll try. Gosh, there's so much that I would like to say, but I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time. But to the family members that are here, I'm not going to begin to try to understand or say that I understand, because none of us do. It's amazing what happens over the course of generations. There's detectives in this very room that have been involved in this in some form or another, literally for generations. And they're owed a debt of gratitude that we can never possibly repay. But you know, their effort was for you. Their effort was for you and for those that remain. I'm the luckiest guy on the planet Earth to be able to represent this profession at this level. And I'm continually amazed, even though we fuss with each other, what happens when we all come together as one for you, for you. It's amazing what happens. The message is, you might be able to hide for a while, but we're going to find you, even if you're not here. And I think one of the most amazing pieces of this puzzle is that this team of people that are standing on the walls on the outside of this and even behind me did the work for you. And know that while science is continuing to evolve, the dedication from people that are standing behind me is as strong as ever. And it's amazing what happens when you put the two together. So it's a pleasure to be able to stand here with you today. And again, I'm most grateful to all of those people over the course of now generations that have stepped up and stepped out for a successful conclusion.
I think that's what everybody expects. So on one hand, we say to the media, thank you, and I really do mean that, for keeping this front and center, not just nationally, but even globally. But then the other side is when you have questions, we can't answer them. So I understand that frustration. I really, truly do. Right now, he's the one that's been that's now facing murder charges. So again, we are not going to stop looking at other people until this is completely done and we have nothing left to do. So 70,000 plus tips, hundreds have come in since 2 weeks ago, week ago Monday, I guess. And we'll continue to receive those tips and look into them as you would expect. Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is there are things that we know that only the killer would know. And I'm speaking generally. And it's an investigative strategy, obviously, that if we know what the killer knows and nobody else does, that when we do talk to the killer, we'll have a clearer idea of what occurred. And that's a very similar strategy that we've used here. Because the individual or individuals that did it, only they know what they did. I don't think at this point it would. Functionally, I understand the question, Hammer. I really do understand it. And we're going to look back on this and probably realize, dang it, I wish we'd have done A, B, and C rather than D and E. Right.
But now's not the time for us to change that strategy and talk about everything that we know. It did. It doesn't anymore. It was, again, that day was very unusual for all of us, the family, the community, the country, the world, period. It was very unusual. And then the reality struck of where we were. And I think that struck the judge at the same time. And I appreciate him having the ability and the courage to step up and step out and say, you know what, this is too big for me. Okay. I didn't know what was going to happen, but here's what's currently happening. Here's the influx. And with this small number of people in a very rural county, it's not something that we can perpetuate and manage. It is frustrating. I will say yes. It is absolutely frustrating because we can't talk about what we think. And I've said this many times before. You should expect us to only talk about what we know. And that even changes more so once there's a probable cause affidavit signed by a judge for the arrest of an individual. Not just Richard Allen, but in any criminal case, especially a complex criminal case. This case is unlike any that I've seen in almost a 40-year career. So there are so many different tentacles to this. It's very complex. And, shame on us for saying something that might jeopardize that. So whoever this, quote, source is, I doubt very seriously that individual is a part of the core team. So there are so many different tentacles to this. It's very complex. So there are so many different tentacles to this. It's very complex. Yes, I can see your perspective, but that wasn't the case. There was one press conference I can remember specifically that Mike and Becky were not aware of, and I regret that. I take responsibility here, and if there's going to be criticism, I want it to come to me. But over time, it was important that we kept talking about this information. Yeah. Everybody expects everything to be solved through science today, and that's just always not the case. It's a combination of all of it. So the human impact has been really, really fascinating to watch. And again, we didn't have a playbook here. something. You know, we're human beings. We're expected to be superhuman. We're not. And we do the best we can every single day. And that's what we'll continue to do. Oh, that's crazy. That was a really cool moment in time. It was a fantastic morning. The perception of not feeling safe is oftentimes worse than the reality of it. And I think that you find that all over Indiana, that people are not feeling as safe as they once did. And again, I think, I should take responsibility for that, and I try to. Unless you see it, you don't understand it. It's the worst thing we've seen in generations. It's going to continue to exponentially increase over time, and we've got a lot of work to do. So we are significantly down. So we're not going to blame somebody else for that. We're trying to take some responsibility. And you know, that all changed with cameras. And I wasn't a big supporter of cameras, but I was wrong. I was flat out wrong. And the cameras have helped us a lot. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating experience as now that we've got them deployed and have 700,000 pieces of video of evidence. So, but you're right that, you know, the lack of that respect is very tenable, and everybody feels it.
We need you. Doesn't matter what you look like. Now is our time. Now is our time. I don't know what else to say. That's the level and the quality and the caliber of law enforcement that you have here in the city of Indianapolis. He has welcomed my agency and what I represent in the state of, in and around the state of Indiana into the city. We can't give you the answers, but we need you to help us. We need you to help us. Now's our time. Now is our time. We are coming. We are coming. And I hope it's not long.
Back at the police checkpoint Tuesday night, just a stone's throw to Jennifer's house, the crime scene is more than physically close. Her stepdaughter knows the victims.
It's been pretty devastating for her and all of her friends as well, because they all know that. So.
How do you explain something like that?
You don't. And then my little boys, they're like, well, why can't we go play in the front yard? And I'm like, well, because it's probably not really a good time right now to do that, you know. It's tragic. I mean, this is a family town, so we all have kids around here, and that's kind of scary.
In fact, the crime scene is about a football field out her back door. She was away Monday afternoon when the two missing girls, Libby German and Abby Williams, were reportedly dropped off nearby to go exploring an old bridge. Jennifer hasn't seen anybody suspicious in the woods here.
You know, you don't even look for that, honestly. It's not something you expect to see. I mean, I'm from California, so this is kind of a shock, and you know, my heart's breaking for the moms right now, because I know how it is.
Waiting for final identification of those bodies. Back to you. Died. Were found along that riverbank. We may know more on that tomorrow as well.
All right, let's get to Delphi, Indiana, the murders there. A hearing for the man accused of killing two teens just wrapped up moments ago. The victims' families face the suspect in court for the very first time. Our cameras captured Richard Allen arriving in court last hour. As you know, he's accused of killing Abigail Williams and Liberty German in 2017. The judge in this case heard arguments about whether or not the evidence against him should be made public today. I want to bring in our legal experts. HLN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Joey Jackson joins us now. Criminologist Casey Jordan and Steve Moore, retired supervisory special agent for the FBI. But first, let's go to our own Barbara McDonald, host of Down the Hill to Delphi Murders podcast, and HLN special investigations producer, who was just inside that courtroom. Barbara, what can you tell us?
Good morning. I can tell you the hearing lasted about 30 minutes. Richard Allen was brought in. He was wearing a bright yellow prison jumpsuit with a bulletproof vest. He was shackled at his hands and feet. He had a chain wrapped around his chest area, and that's where his hands were shackled. So they were up pretty high, not down low, as you might expect. He came in with his attorneys. He sat down. Just before he did sit down, he did look into the gallery and made eye contact with several members of Abby and Libby's families who were sitting there. There were about 17 or 18 members of both families present for this hearing. Once the hearing got underway, Nick McLeland, the prosecutor for Carroll County, made several arguments about why this information should remain sealed. He presented 4 exhibits to the court regarding his argument, and basically he said there were 2 reasons why he wanted that information to remain sealed. One was to protect any witnesses that were mentioned in that document, and 2, because this is an ongoing and active investigation. And Mr. McLeland actually said in court that they have good reason to believe that Mr. Allen is not the only actor in this heinous crime, and that they are looking for anyone else who may be involved in this case. And that is why they want all of that information to remain sealed. The defense attorneys took a very different approach. They said that they are asking for transparency, that is the norm in these matters, and that Mr. Allen would like this information that is being used against him at this point to be made public. The defense attorneys did agree that the information about some of the witnesses, they don't have an objection to that being redacted, that some of the witnesses were described as being current minors. Some of them were minors at the time of their witness involvement. And so the prosecutor in this case did present the judge with a redacted version of the probable cause affidavit for her to review. It was not entered into evidence at this point or listed as an exhibit, but she did say that she would consider that as part of her notes. Once the hearing wrapped up, the judge said that she would take all of this under advisement. She would go over her notes and case law and make a written ruling on whether or not the probable cause and charging documents in this case should remain sealed or whether they should be released to the public, and if so, how they should be released to the public, how much of a redaction there should be, whether she's going to agree with what the prosecutor presented her in court today or not. Now, we also talked about a bond hearing in this case. Within the last 48 hours, the defense attorneys did file for bond in this case, or to have Mr. Allen released on his own recognizance. And the judge said that she would like to set a different hearing for that. That is going to happen on February 17th, which is just a few days after the anniversary of these murders, which were February 13th of 2017, the 6-year anniversary approaching. That's the week we're going to be back in court to find out whether Mr. Allen is going to get bond or whether he would be allowed to be released on his own recognizance. His attorneys, in their motion filing for that bond, did say that they don't believe that there is enough evidence against him to hold him without bond, and that is why they are asking for him to be released either with a minimal bond or on his own recognizance. Now, there was initially, when this case was, when Mr. Allen was first arrested, there was a hearing set for January of 2023. That hearing has now been canceled, and that hearing will be blended into the bond hearing, which is scheduled again for February 17th of 2023. Also, right now, there is, from the original court calendar, a trial scheduled for March. It is unknown at this time if anybody is going to be ready for a trial at that time. I do anticipate that will probably be moved, but the next time we're in court on this case is going to be in February of 2023.
Oh, wow. Okay, Barbara, just so much to break down there. A couple things stood out to me, and certainly I want to get to more on the advisement. But you caught my attention when you said that he made eye contact with the family. So before we get into some of these nuances, can you just paint a picture for us? Can you, were there any sounds uttered? How long was the eye contact? I mean, just for us, we've been waiting so many years, and then I can't fathom these two parties making eye contact.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was sitting with several of the family members, and we were in court for about an hour before the hearing began. And so we were talking, and many of them were sharing with me that they are looking at this and taking this information in and have not made any judgments yet about whether Richard Allen is guilty, whether he deserves to be charged with what he has been charged with. They are waiting to hear all of the evidence that the state has against him, just like the public is. The sheriff came in and also announced to everyone that there was an order of silence for the court proceeding today, and that anybody that made any sound out loud could be escorted from the courtroom. So once Mr. Allen was brought in and he made eye contact, I didn't hear anything. I didn't feel like that gasp or anything that anybody had. I think that the family members were genuinely curious to see how he was going to present himself. I don't know him. I didn't know him prior to these charges, but he definitely appeared curious. He made eye contact for several seconds, sort of scanned the two rows where the family members were sitting. He made eye contact with me because I was right next to some of the family members. And then once he did sit down, he was looking around the courtroom. It is a historic courtroom. It's a beautiful courtroom. And he seemed to be sort of taking in the architecture. He had attorneys flanking him on both sides, and he did not say a single word during today's proceeding.
Wow.
Well, that, and I'm an attorney, and I have to tell you that's a really strong argument by his defense attorney. After all, if we don't know what's in the affidavit, I mean, how, as the motion points out, no one in the public has seen the probable cause affidavit. So how can we assess whether the allegations against Allen are even strong? A good defense attorney is going to pick right up on that. They're going to point out just what the press is arguing when they're arguing for this to be released, that secrecy breeds this concept that there is no confidence in the case, that they're still working on it, that this is like a Hail Mary pass arresting this guy. And they're going to argue that if you can't really bring that evidence to bear, then he should be let out on a reasonable bail or on his own recognizance. It's a really good argument. But I think you're right. The most shocking thing that we've learned this morning is that the prosecutor believes there could be another bad actor. That's really not going to breed confidence. Why isn't this other bad actor also under arrest? It's almost sending a message, we're figuring it out as we go. I can play this both ways. I can see why we would want to keep these things sealed. We want to make sure that when this goes to trial, if it goes to trial, that we can get an impartial jury. And yet at the same time, you could get a jury who believes that this is a kangaroo court, that this was an arrest of convenience, that the prosecutor simply felt public pressure to produce somebody, and that maybe they've got the wrong guy. So, it can go either way. I do like that the judge is going to be thoughtful, take her time, really look at the facts carefully before making a judgment, because emotion shouldn't have anything to do with this. It really should just be based on the facts.
Barbara, these families have been waiting almost 6 years just to get inside this courtroom. Can you tell us what it was like to be inside and what happened?
Well, we were all led into the courtroom. They opened the court about 8 a.m., so about an hour before the hearing. We were led in and seated. They filled every available seat, and then they brought in a table with some chairs to bring in a few other journalists. It appeared that most of the people in the audience were members of the media. There were about 18 members of Abby and Libby's families also in attendance. The first row of the gallery was reserved, and no one sat there, perhaps to provide an extra buffer between the gallery and the attorneys and Richard Allen himself. He was led into court wearing a bright yellow prison jumpsuit, that bulletproof vest, a chain wrapped around his chest area where his hands were shackled. His feet were also shackled. Before he sat down, he did look at the gallery. He looked at the family members. He made eye contact with several of them, and then he sat down. He did not say anything during today's proceeding. It lasted about 30 minutes. The prosecutor's arguments for keeping this information sealed at this point was twofold. One, to protect the witnesses, especially juvenile witnesses, and the second was because he says there are other people being looked at who could be involved in this case. In fact, he said they had good reason to believe that Mr. Allen was not the only actor in this heinous crime. That was from the prosecutor, Nicholas McLeland. The defense argued for transparency in this matter, that is the norm in these proceedings, and that they believe that the secrecy throughout this investigation, because investigators have not released very much information throughout the process, yet they have multiple times asked the public for their help in solving this case. The defense attorneys argued that all of that just contributed to the attention, and that by releasing the information, that's how this process should work, and that was what they preferred and Mr. Allen preferred in this matter.
Really catches my attention when the prosecutors say this may not be the only bad actor. My jaw almost hit the ground. Why didn't we know that information before, and what does that mean?
Exactly. That's the one thing that came out this morning that I was not expecting as a criminologist or as an attorney. And let's look at that one sentence Barbara just read one more time. The prosecutor has good reason to believe that Allen is not the only actor in this heinous crime. What? If there is somebody else, and a good reason, okay, apparently not enough probable cause to make an arrest. And if we're going to be looking for Richard Allen to be convicted with proof beyond a reasonable doubt, then we just kind of introduced some lovely reasonable doubt that Richard Allen may not be guilty, may not be entirely guilty, had an accomplice. From a criminology perspective, this would be highly unusual. If you're talking about somebody who would be a co-defendant, that he did not act alone in murdering these two young ladies, that would be on one side of the spectrum. The other side is just that we're talking about somebody who may have destroyed evidence, who knew and didn't turn him in. It could be that the bad actor, it doesn't even say bad actor, just another actor. So I'm worried that this is just a red herring, and that the message it sends is that they don't have a strong case. Statistically, this guy acted alone, most likely. And if they've got the evidence, they should be proud of it, and they shouldn't be afraid to release it.
You
twice as long.
say hi Instagram.
Sleep better or find relief.
Say hi Instagram.
Call now.
Peter.
1-800-356.
Say hi Instagram.
The head of the Indiana State Police telling Fox 59 more than 6 years after the deadly Flora fire, the investigation has developed very little information. The fire happened in November of 2016 and killed 4 sisters. Their names were Keani Welch, Carol McDonald, Kiara Phillips, and Kiana Davis. And now, Fox 59's chief investigator Steve Brown live here this morning breaking down this interview with ISPS superintendent. And again, so many rumors surrounding this case. It's probably the case we get asked about the most and why it's still unsolved.
Yeah, you almost from the beginning, rumors about that have been pretty persistent up in Florida that Galen Rose had some hand in, some role in that fire that killed her 4 daughters. The state police superintendent told me that's not true. In our interview just a few days ago, Superintendent Carter told me that Rose was not a suspect. But Carter expressed frustration that his investigators on the case have not been able to speak with Rose for some time. The superintendent also said something very interesting. Listen closely here while he pushed back on often made comparisons about the Delphi murder case and the Florida fire investigation.
Connecting an arson with very little information to a homicide that's developed over 80,000 tips it's an unfair analogy or an unfair comparison between the two.
Again, Carter indicates that there's very little information to go on in the Florida investigation. That's his assessment. Now, that's more than 6.5 years after the fatal fire. There is something of a disconnect between the investigation and Galen Rose, the mother of those 4 girls. Carter says his investigators very much want to talk to her and haven't for some time. He didn't put a time frame onto it. Subsequent to that, I had a phone conversation with Galen Rose, and she estimated, and she couldn't put a particular date onto it, it's been years since she's talked to someone from the state police. And it's typical in these kinds of investigations that investigators come back to key witnesses and ask more questions as more information develops. So again, there is something of a disconnect there. And again, the state police superintendent is saying there's very little information here 6.5 years in.
And that's the thing that's so frustrating, or people don't understand that. What do you think here is, I know you have a lot of work to do, and I think you were just given a bunch of information too. So
I have a stack of
explain a little bit about where we stand now and what steps are maybe being taken to find the person that did this.
Well, we still get told that this is an active investigation, that state police are working on this when new information comes in. It seems like there's little information coming in at the time. But I will tell you that there is going to be more information kind of coming forward into public eye later this year, because Galen Rose has filed a federal civil lawsuit against the owners of the home that she had rented where her daughters died. And the discovery process of that will mean that there's a whole bunch more information that will be available to the public probably for the first time. So while there's limited information, the state police have been, generally speaking, tight-lipped. In 2 previous requests on 2 previous stories I did about the Florida fire, the state police declined abilities to be able to talk on camera or put me in touch with investigators to try and find out what's new with this particular case. We're only getting dribs and drabs now. There's going to be a much more information that comes out when that trial starts and expected to be later.
And I know
this
it was
year.
very surprising when you were on another story, and then all of a sudden, Carter said, no, she's not a suspect. And it's like, to hear it put that way at that time, it was just very distinct.
Yeah,
to hear that.
To his credit,
we
had questions about Florida. We've been trying to talk to him about this particular story, and he and his department has said no thank you twice. So I sat in front of him and said, hey, got these questions, do you want to answer them? And he said, okay. So I told him I just had 3, and I fired away with my 3 and the follow-ups on that. And that piece of information I think is really important right off the top about Galen Rose not being a suspect, because I'm pretty sure you've heard them, I've heard them, perhaps everybody in the newsroom, that there is some level of suspicion that she was a suspect or somehow had a hand in that fire. So at least, the state police is on record saying that's not the case.
Steve, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chief investigator for a reason.
Superintendent Doug Carter sat down with us recently to discuss a totally different topic. But at the end of the interview, he agreed to take some questions about the Florida fire investigation. My first question got a quick, short answer. Is Galen Rose considered a suspect in this case? She is not. That's the first time we've heard that.
I worked hard for my baby.
Rose is the mother of the 4 girls killed in the November 2016 blaze. She has been the subject of persistent rumors in Florida that she may have had a hand in the fire. There are people up there who... Another of our questions for Superintendent Carter involves the other big Carroll County investigation, the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German.
We believe you are hiding in plain sight.
Which happened just 3 months after the Flora fire. Fox 59 has previously reported that while state police released to the public evidence, audio and video recordings in the Delphi murder investigation to generate tips, the same had not been done in the Flora fire case, which has not yet had an arrest. Investigated that fire. We asked the superintendent why the different approaches.
The analogy that they're the same, and that was something that was perpetuated by your story, is just simply inaccurate. That's not true. That's not true. Connecting an arson with very little information to a homicide that's developed over 80,000 tips it's an unfair analogy or an unfair comparison between the two.
But people up there see them as similar. They're horrible events resulting in deaths of young girls.
We can't make things happen. We can't make people talk to us.
Now, early on in the investigation, the fire was classified as an arson. Former ATF fire investigator Mike Vergon agrees.
We look at every potential ignition source.
Vergon runs a private fire investigation business.
The discovery of the smoke.
He was hired to look into the Flora fire by attorneys for Galen Rose, who's filed a wrongful death suit against the home's owners. Inside the deeply charred apartment, Vergon looked for clues on how the fire started and for smoke detectors.
We found one.
And can you tell us where you found it?
That was in the second level of the residence, on a landing actually, and there was no battery in it. The condition this was in, there should have been a battery still in it if the battery had been present.
State law requires every dwelling have at least one functional smoke detector. For rental properties, that's the responsibility of the owner, manager, or rental agent. Hunting for the source of the fire, Vergon took a long look at the kitchen where the fire damage was intense.
Looking at patterns.
Getting extra attention by Vergon, appliances, the range, the refrigerator.
We look at the fire patterns in relation to the damage on the cords. Is there insulation left on the cords? Is there no insulation left on the cords?
But the cords were in good shape. The source of the fire, not electrical. Maybe the most important information cited in Vergon's report is from the man who first rushed into the smoke-filled building, Adam Ayers.
He was there first before the police or the fire department. First person to go in the house other than the family.
Ayers, a neighbor, told investigators he crawled into the dining room to get to the stairs leading to the girls' upstairs bedroom. But in the nearby kitchen, he saw a 2-inch wide path of fire on the floor that led into the back porch area.
So he got a pretty good view and described it in detail.
Did anybody else see this other than him?
No, he's the only one.
The combination of the narrow trail of flame and burn patterns found in and near the back porch were critical in Vergon's conclusion.
We came to our determination that it was a set fire.
How confident are you that that fire was intentionally set?
100% confident.
Carroll County Sheriff's deputy is speaking out for the first time since trying to save 4 children from a house fire in Flora.
The girls died in the fire and Deputy Drew Yoder was seriously injured. News 18's Samantha Tiki reports his accounts of what happened that tragic day.
November 21st, 2016 is a day that lingers in the minds of many in Carroll County, especially Deputy Drew Yoder.
We got to go in and get him. That was me and Josh's first thinking.
Yoder and Flora police officer Josh Dysinger were the first to arrive after a report of a fire at the East Columbia Street home. Yoder, who drove past the home frequently, saw Galen Rose outside and was familiar with her 4 daughters who were still trapped inside.
Those girls were always outside on a nice day, dancing around the Columbia Street Division Street sign. And the greatest thing was they would all stop, smile, and just wave as you pass by.
Yoder and Dysinger sprang to action.
With no hesitation, we both entered inside the residence 3 different times. There was little fear in my mind. The only thing that was going through it was that there were 4 little girls inside the residence that were needing our help.
Despite their efforts, the smoke and heat were just too much.
Dysinger and I never stopped trying. We went inside, came back out for air, went back in, came back out, each time getting farther and farther inside. The third time is when things went bad.
Yoder was severely injured trying to save all 4 girls who died from smoke inhalation. After waking up in the hospital days later, he learned the tragic news.
When I was told the 4 little girls did not make it, my heart sank to my stomach.
While he mourned the girls' lives, he gained strength through all those who reached out to him during his recovery. That includes the man who saved his life.
Floor Officer Josh Dysinger, thank you. You, my friend, are my hero.
Yoder returned to duty at the end of December, but says he returned a changed man.
I still think about it every day. My hands and stuff, they still remind me of it every day, but I just got to push forward and do what I have to do.
And while Yoder's scars will fade with time, it's the emotional scars that remain.
This incident will forever impact my life, but it will not stop me from performing my duties.
5 years later, a fire that killed 4 sisters in Flora in Carroll County, it remains unsolved. This morning, the message that state police want you and the family to hear.
And it's time to open up our unsolved case file tonight.
Court TV put a spotlight on the 4 sisters killed in 2016 in a fire in Flora. State police say it was arson. Superintendent Doug Carter was a guest on the program and offered this pointed message about the ongoing investigation.
One thing we do believe, and it's important that everyone hears this, is we don't believe the person that did this intended to kill those 4 little girls. And that's really important that the nation hears this, that the family hears that.
The nearly 13-minute segment, part of Court TV's commitment to highlight cases that remain unsolved.
You may even know something that you don't think is significant, but could really help the families and investigators solve these cases.
The show also shared exclusive videos and interviews done by WRTV. We were also able to provide perspective on the toll that this has taken on the town of Flora and the family.
How is she able to get up every morning? It has to be extremely difficult for her.
Well, Betty, I spoke to Galen Rose before we went on the air tonight, and she wants to thank you for bringing attention to this case. And Galen tells me that, of course, she misses her daughter's smiles. They love to laugh in that home there in Florida.
For the investigators, this broadcast was also meant to generate tips to hopefully solve the case.
The case is not cold. So we would encourage the nation to pay attention to what they're seeing and what they're hearing tonight.
The goal, to bring peace to the family of the girls.
Investigators spent the day on the scene of a house fire that claimed 2 lives in Monticello today.
Fox 59's Russ McQuaid shows us how the community is dealing with the loss.
An overnight fire that claimed 2 lives inside this house has rocked this community hard on the edge of Lake Schaefer. A procession following the removal of the bodies made its way to the White County Coroner's office in Monticello by midday, while the investigation continued back on North Lakeshore Drive.
We have our initial investigators working around the perimeter, taking photographs, initial documentation of the scene. We have some of our other resources. We have an accelerant dog. Not to presume that there's anything, but we always bring a dog in just to run a perimeter check. And again, photographs and scene documentation.
Neighbors say the residents moved in here about a year ago, had a child still living at home, the father well known in the community, and their first hint of trouble is when the power went out overnight. Those neighbors also told me it didn't take long for the 2 a.m. fire to consume the house.
Because of the severe damage to the structure, it's going to take a significant amount of time for the cause and origin determination. We try not to have any preconceived idea when we come in, looking at the facts of each individual incident. And again, we're in our early stages of this, so it's going to be quite a while.
Twin Lakes Senior High School, where one of the victims attended classes, was on an e-learning break this week, but open for students to visit with counselors and local clergy as teens prepared a more public memorial to their lost friend in the fence line of a tennis court across the street. And school officials say there will be counselors available at Twin Lakes High School tomorrow for any students who want to talk.
Now in a News 18 update, the White County Coroner's Office has confirmed to News 18 the cause of death for both victims of a Monticello house fire. Stephanie Thompson and her daughter Maya died of smoke inhalation. Fire crews found them while battling a house fire back on February 17th. The Monticello community gathered at the Twin Lakes High School back in February to remember Stephanie, who worked for state police, and Maya, who was a junior at Twin Lakes. News 18 has been told by multiple agencies that a news release was sent out when the cause of death was determined. However, News 18 did not receive a release.
And we start right now with At.PM and a bombshell allegation from the Delphi murders case.
We've got to get right to Danielle Zukoski. At.PM.'s Danielle Zukoski. The defense says prosecutors are withholding evidence. What's that about, Danielle?
Yes, well, this motion to compel was the first of 7 filings Richard Allen's attorneys entered into court today. But the most important when it comes to his criminal case, this filing alleges the state withheld key pieces of evidence during the discovery process that would help to better build their case that Allen is not the killer. It also calls for sanctions against the prosecution if the state did indeed break the rules of discovery, and this causes a delay in the trial. The motion to compel asks for evidence, including geomapping of all of the cell phones in the area of the Monon High Bridge at the time of the murders. The defense says none of those phones were linked to Allen. They also asked for video and audio of police interviews and information from an interview with an expert in ritualistic sacrifices.
What's interesting is there are some points in there where they admit that some of the evidence they're asking for may not even exist. They're just guessing that it's likely to exist in their opinion.
This filing comes less than a week after the defense filed a request for a speedy trial. Under Indiana law, the trial must start in 70 days, and this gives a mid-May deadline and an official trial date of May 13th. This motion to compel could delay the trial.
The defense is specifically asking for sanctions of the prosecutor in the form of, if this gets continued, it be blamed on the prosecutor. So, I mean, if they're even thinking about that, that really seems to strongly indicate to me that there'll probably be more delays, and we should not necessarily expect May.
While unlikely, according to Greenlee, who is an attorney, if the 70-day clock runs out because the prosecution broke rules, Allen would be released from jail. If Allen is not tried in court, he could still be recharged with these crimes and tried in court at a later date. The defense also filed a motion to move the proceedings back to Carroll County, where the crime took place. It's important to note there are two legal matters playing out in the courts at the same time: the criminal trial against Allen and the contempt hearing for his lawyers. All of the additional filings relate to the contempt hearing. The most important asks the court to postpone the hearing altogether in order to get this case to trial. Experts say that hearing should not be able to remove the attorneys from this case after the Indiana Supreme Court got involved last year. So the criminal trial could move forward first. Danielle Zolkowski, Wish TV, I-Team 8.
All right, thanks, Danielle. We'll stay with I-Team 8. The additional filings in the contempt hearing add more witnesses. Ask the prosecutor to recuse himself because he is a witness in the hearing, and ask the judge to recuse herself due to a lack of neutrality.
Those motions were filed at the same time as one to postpone this hearing altogether and focus first on the criminal trial. But as of now, the contempt of court hearing is still set to move forward. I-Team 8 has obtained new documents relating to that hearing. They give us an insight into what could unfold on Monday. I-Team 8 anchor Dakari Turner explains.
Monday's hearing is set to deal with contempt of court accusations against Richard Allen's attorneys, Brad Rozzi and Andrew Baldwin. Prosecutors want the judge to take some type of disciplinary action against the defense team over a leak of evidence in the Delphi murders last year. That leak, tied back to the defense team's legal office, included never-before-released photos of the scene where Abby Williams and Libby German died. Judge Francis Gohl has already called the attorneys grossly negligent for the leak, pushing them off the case in October of last year.
We've had an unexpected turn of events, ladies and gentlemen. The defense attorneys have withdrawn their representation of Mr. Allen.
Allen's attorneys have filed notice they plan to introduce evidence Monday that prosecutors had been in contact with online true crime podcasters and YouTube creators. One of them, Gary Baudet, who runs the YouTube page Fig Solve, which has spent extensive time covering the Delphi case.
I've gone from learning about the Delphi murders while listening to a podcast called True Crime Garage to creating YouTube videos to spread awareness about the case and to encourage people to tip in relevant information to law enforcement, hoping that a little nudge would make someone who knew something say something.
The defense team points to an October 22nd, 2022 video from the page that talks about a bullet found at the crime scene and linked to Allen when that information was still under seal and a week before it was unsealed. Allen's attorneys also plan to present evidence of Baudet communications about the disqualification of defense counsel, giving prosecutors defense work product and court staff revelations. In a letter to the court obtained by I-Team 8 Tuesday, Baudet defends his work, saying he did contact prosecutors when he received unsolicited Delphi evidence. He goes on to write, "I must unequivocally state that I was not involved in any strategy to disseminate crime scene photos." He goes on to claim his online interactions have been misrepresented by individuals who have targeted me due to my support for the Indiana prosecutor, law enforcement, and the Honorable Judge Gohl.
Breaking news right now. In the last couple of hours, we have learned the defense team in the Delphi murders case is renewing two big requests. First, the attorneys want to delay a hearing set for Monday, and second, they want evidence thrown out. The defense team is again arguing the court should throw out evidence discovered in the search of Richard Allen's home. They say they have new information about how the sheriff lied or misled the judge to get the search warrant. Specifically, the defense says data about cell phones shows other people were in and around the crime scene the afternoon of the murders. Also, another filing today says the defense team is just this week receiving new information critical to their ability to respond to contempt accusations, and they can't be ready for that hearing Monday. The defense attorneys also say they just received recordings of 8 interviews, many of which are tied to the evidence leak. Richard Allen is accused of killing Abby Williams and Libby German 7 years ago. The girls went for a walk and their bodies were found the next day.
So my last video pissed you off. Well, this one's really gonna piss you off. So you don't like my hat? You think I'm the murderer because I'm wearing this hat, right? Well, how about this hat? Does this hat trigger you?
There are many dates in a lifetime that you're going to remember. The date your children are born, the date you're married, the date you buy a first house, the date Abby and Libby went missing. One of those dates was last Friday, October 28, 2022. At that time, we had gathered evidence, and the judge did find probable cause for an arrest of Richard Allen. This investigation is far from complete.
As Mr. Allen is now without counsel, I've ordered him transported back to the Department of Correction. Obviously, without counsel, Mr. Allen's hearing cannot proceed.
What's your reaction to the fact that his counsel withdrew and he wasn't even in court today?
Very disappointed. It doesn't seem to be much of a surprise.
I cannot believe this case, the way it's devolved. It was difficult enough for Abby and Libby trying to get justice for these two young girls in solving the case. It took more than 5 years to arrest and charge someone who, like, on the second day of the investigation, they knew was there, and they never followed up on it. It's unreal. But now Richard Allen has been charged, and his trial, he's asking for a speedy trial. He wants his trial, claiming his innocence, saying it's the Odinist that did it. He's getting his speedy trial May 13th. It will begin. Obviously, we'll be covering it. But what about the contempt hearing for his lawyers who've been reinstated? Well, is that going to happen beforehand? Take a look up on the screen. Those attorneys now are saying the prosecutor needs to recuse himself from the contempt proceedings if they felt that this is unreal. What they're saying is that they waited and waited and waited. This is for conduct that took place before, and now they're saying that the prosecutor should be recused from this. Who else do they want recused from the contempt hearing? The judge. The court previously not only criticized the same defense attorneys for the same conduct now alleged by the state to be contemptuous, it also coerced them into withdrawing their representation of Mr. Allen for that conduct. The court cannot appear to be neutral and detached arbiter of the state's contempt allegations, and accordingly, the court should recuse itself from all of this. In the meantime, the defense has also asked for all of this just to be stayed until after the trial. This is just a distraction for everyone for preparation for a trial now 61 days away. It is also a disservice to the families involved. In short, the court and the attorneys need to get back to the critical issues to stop the diversionary filings. We have a trial. It's beginning on May 13th, but we've got a hearing on these headed charges and contempt claim on March 18th. What's going on in Indiana? Let's bring back in our think tank. What is this?
It's predictably unpredictable. It's confusing to me. It's confusing to the court. But why not? Why wouldn't the judge recuse herself and let another judge hear it? Easy.
Do we really need to take care of this contempt hearing before this trial?
Unless the punishment for contempt is you cannot represent this defendant, no. Because if they're just going to be sanctioned and the lawyer's going to be slapped with a fine or pay some fees, no, do that later. It's a distraction.
Can't you lock someone up for contempt?
You can. Yeah, we can do that later too.
So what happens if they have this contempt hearing before the trial and they're preparing for this trial and they put the lawyers in jail for a few days?
Okay, some diehard defense lawyers have to experience this every once in a while, and you purge the contempt by paying a fine and you get out. So it happens. But no, this can wait till later. I find it highly suspicious that a higher court has said, Judge, you need to recuse yourself. The judge says no and is calling in the defense again to criticize them when she should probably just hand it off to somebody else and proceed with trial.
Do it now. Get the contempt over with, because when and if he goes to trial, and if he is convicted, not the Odinist, but him, then he has another grounds for appeal because his attorneys were ineffective, because they couldn't be effective. They were so fearful of what was going to happen on that contempt. Get it done, get it over with, put it behind you.
It's so complicated right now. So as we head towards this trial, which is going to happen May 13th, do you expect the defense, the original attorneys back on, to go full pedal to the metal with the odinous defense here. That it was a ritualistic killing, and we know exactly who is responsible because they pointed fingers at specific people.
Absolutely. I am obsessed with this case and cannot wait, and I'm so glad that they are invoking speedy trial, which strategically is genius. I've done it in a few trials, and they're basically saying to the state, get ready, we're ready. I think that their theory is cohesive. I think they have credible, cogent evidence. It's going to be shocking. I think it is entirely based on Odinistic ritual, which I really didn't know much about, but since the inception of the Richard Allen case, I have learned so much by virtue of his jailers, those working in the sheriff's office, things that were apparently left at the scene, and we only have much more to learn. It's going to be fascinating.
What are we going to see? The way we're looking at Richard Allen, who looked so healthy when he was first arrested, and now he's emaciated. Will he live long enough to see his trial?
You want a speedy trial when the other side doesn't want it, right? That's the biggest, when the judge is putting it off and the prosecution is not pushing it, they don't feel strong enough about their case. That's when you want to go forward.
Well, and that's what confuses me here is this guy told someone that he was there on the bridge that day, right? The times have changed depending upon which affidavit you read, but the bottom line is he should have been fully investigated 5 years ago, and it just kind of sat on the bottom of a stack of paper somewhere. I don't understand that. It's very confusing to me, but this trial is happening, and we will be covering it.
In the motion to compel, it is stated in numerous points that geofencing information showed movements of multiple phones in and around the crime scene were tracked. Geofencing uses GPS, RFID, Wi-Fi, or other cellular data to trigger a pre-programmed action when a mobile device or RFID tag enters or exits a virtual boundary set up around a geographical location. The area of the Monon High Bridge trail makes it difficult due to the cell tower coverage to accurately analyze GPS data, and geofencing data might not be precise enough to know if anyone was walking by the crime scene within 100 yards. The movements between 3:02 p.m. and 3:27 p.m. on February 13th may have been Cheyenne and her friends on their phone.